malevolent army, led by a demon called Belial, wages a war against humanity. This army will fight several deadly battles, culminating in a decisive world war. Will God intervene? Or will the human race be swallowed by eternal night? For thousands of years, prophets around the world have predicted the end of days. More than one suggests the apocalypse is fast approaching. We call this theoretical convergence between doomsday prophecies and today's events the Nostradamus effect. (1947), the Judean desert. In a remote, arid cave high above the Dead Sea, a nomadic shepherd discovers a cryptic scroll that describes a secret prophecy. It contains such mysterious phrases as Army of Belial and King of Kittim. Do these phrases foreshadow a moment when two forces, one light, the other dark, will confront each other in a final cataclysm, resulting in a nuclear World War III, and possibly the end of everything? Among the many discovered Dead Sea Scrolls is the so-called War Scroll, with its prophecy of doom. But who is this message for? Written 2 millennia ago, the scroll was left behind amidst a war that would ravage Judaism and leave the rebuilt Solomon's Temple in ruins. The War Scroll is the only existing first-hand account from a mysterious group of Jewish mystics who claim to know the events of the last Great War.
Their purpose of putting this together was to teach of a prophetic event, a yet future event.
It's not surprising that groups today will go to the War Scroll and say, maybe it can teach us something. Maybe if we're able to line up the different stages of the battle with contemporary events, we would have kind of the key to unlocking these divine mysteries.
We will examine whether those of us alive today are the intended audience for the War Scroll, as this 2,000-year-old document spells out in chilling detail the end of the world. Does the prophecy contained within the War Scroll converge with other texts in the Old and New Testament? Is it similar to doomsday prophecies in other cultures? And are current events similar to those described in the scroll, suggesting that this might be the past actually revealing the future? One more example of the Nostradamus effect. Understanding the War Scroll's possible link to today's unrest means delving into the ancient origins of the Dead Sea Scrolls and exploring their discovery in the Judean desert.
The Dead Sea Scrolls were a group of documents found in 1947 near the Dead Sea, hence the name. They were found in a cave by a young Bedouin goat herd, or so the story goes.
The scrolls are a collection of handwritten biblical texts that took up to 200 years to write. Collectively, they contain fragments of nearly the entire Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament. Archaeologists ultimately discovered 10 more caves nearby, containing nearly 900 animal skin and papyrus documents in sealed jars. The scrolls are important because they are a closer approximation of the original source material of parts of the Hebrew Bible.
When we look at the origins of, say, Christianity, we're dealing with the gospel. They've been manipulated, they've been translated. They don't give us honest history, they give us an interpretation of history. The Dead Sea Scrolls issued directly from the group of people who constructed them, who wrote them. And to that extent, they give us the direct link to their beliefs and to a certain amount their history.
Written perhaps between 170 BC and 68 AD, The scrolls are believed to be all that remain of a small Jewish sect that lived in a settlement at Qumran, a plateau in the Judean desert along the Dead Sea, 12 miles east of Jerusalem. The sect is known as the Essenes.
That means that they lived in the time that both Rabbinic Judaism and the community surrounding Jesus that eventually became the church were being formed. So in that respect, this is just an extraordinary finding. You actually have authentic, handwritten texts from a community living at this time.
Some scholars believe the Essenes authored the scrolls, but who were they?
Kind of an extreme Jewish group that felt that they needed to withdraw and not mix with the rest of society in order to keep themselves religiously pure. They did that because they were not pleased with what they were seeing in their society and thinking that it had gone awry, and did not want to participate in that part of society that they felt was no longer right with God.
According to some scholars, the Essenes believed the Jewish people had angered God by not living according to Hebrew scriptures, that they were too secular and humanistic, and that this was why God had allowed invaders such as the Romans to conquer the Jewish homeland. The Essenes were led by a charismatic leader they called the Teacher of Righteousness.
He is credited with having really brought the group together, given it direction. He was a very charismatic leader who was given the ability by God to properly interpret Scripture, and the faithful of that movement then agreed with his interpretation of Scripture.
Some historians believe that this Teacher of Righteousness was a member of the Zadokites, a set of Jewish priests who were ousted by the Romans. The Essenes believed that the Zadokites were the rightful high priests of the sacred Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Though some say the Essenes led a peaceful communal life, others consider them an apocalyptic cult.
People think that the Essenes, what they've heard of, are peace-loving, retiring, apolitical, meditative. That is not the group that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. You have to define them by what the scrolls say. Well, the scrolls are not peace-loving. The scrolls are not meditative. The scrolls are apocalyptic, militant, and aggressive.
Interpreters of the scrolls suggest that a belief in a coming apocalypse may have inspired the Essenes to create the War Scroll, which they believe to be an ancient blueprint on the art of war. But could it also be interpreted as a prophecy of a future Armageddon? Evidence may lie in the War Scrolls text, which lays out a framework for a violent confrontation between two opposing forces. The opening lines of the text read,
"The first attack of the sons of light shall be undertaken against the forces of the sons of darkness."
Some War Scroll scholars believe the Essenes were referring to themselves when they described the Sons of Light.
They called themselves the community of the renewed covenant. The Sons of Light therefore include those who are true in their understanding of Scripture, their application of Scripture.
But some also see parallels between the Essenes and certain devout practitioners of the Jewish faith today.
The Jewish people have traditionally viewed themselves collectively as the people that represent that mission, of representing light in terms of spiritual light and values.
But the scroll also emphasizes a mysterious group called the Sons of Darkness, who will engage the Sons of Light in battle. Are these the forces of evil who have turned their backs on God? Referring to the Sons of Darkness, the text says,
"Supporting them are those who have violated the covenant."
The Sons of Darkness, as described in the War Scroll, also include the violators of the covenant. And that terminology brings us to a very interesting aspect of this kind of apocalyptic worldview, which is that there are enemies from without, but you also have to be careful of the enemies within.
In order to understand who the Sons of Darkness would be today, we have to look at the Essenes' understanding of the violators of the covenant who had fallen away from God but who claimed to be religious.
According to some scholars, the Essenes identified the sons of darkness as Jewish people who had spurned strict Judaic practice, known as Levitical law, and those who lacked morals.
According to the initial author of the War Scroll, these people are also part of the children of darkness, kind of like traitors.
But does evidence support relying on the War Scroll to identify sons of darkness and sons of light in modern times? History may provide a clue. In 37 BC, after hundreds of years of domination by the Persians and Greeks, Jerusalem found itself under occupation once more, this time by the Romans.
There is a new enemy to react to, and so Rome now governs and places people on the Judean throne, such as Herod the Great, who was not Jewish, and as a result offends Jewish sentiment, certainly offended the sentiment of those who embraced the War Scroll.
The people who wrote these texts hated the Romans. They hated being dominated by a foreign invading force. The Romans were pagan overlords because they insisted that they have sacrifices to the Roman emperor in the Jewish temple. They also insisted on tax being paid to Rome. They also had a lot of practices which the staunch Jews considered unclean and immoral.
In 66 AD, militant Jewish groups rose up in revolt against the Romans. But they were ultimately slaughtered, and in 70 AD their holy site, the rebuilt Temple of Solomon, was destroyed. Historians believe that in the midst of Jerusalem's destruction, the Romans advanced on the Dead Sea area as well.
Pliny was the general who conquered that area because it had to be conquered. And there were some extremist groups out there who had more militaristic intentions. Caught up with them was the group at the Dead Sea, the people who wrote those scrolls.
Before meeting their final destiny, the Essenes left a grim prophecy about mankind's annihilation. Some have identified similarities between the violence exacted against the Essenes and modern calamity in our own time. Clues point to this forgotten location in the Middle East. Is this ground zero for a coming apocalypse? The Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the greatest discoveries of the 20th century. Among these ancient texts is a prophecy of the ultimate battle between good and evil, the forces of light and darkness. The War Scroll. Some interpreters suggest it foretells World War III in our time.
The reality that's seen in the scroll is one that they expected it to happen. If we believe in the reality of the biblical text when it speaks, then those must be fulfilled in the future.